Welcome back, everyone. Today we are continuing our conversation on risk and resilience in the logistics with our partner and our colleague Mirko Senatore. Mirko, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me again, Victoria.
As I mentioned, today's topic is the latest fraud trends affecting the logistics sector and what's changing, who is getting hardest, and what practical steps companies can do right now to take these risks away. So, fraud in logistics used to sound like a rare edge case, but today it feels like it's becoming a standard operation risk. So, that is why I'm wondering what are some of the key fraud trends currently affecting the logistics sector, let's say.
Yeah, Victor. So once again, hi everyone. You know, we I think we talked about a little bit logistics fraud before. Now today, obviously, we have the opportunity to do this a little bit in greater detail. Um, Nothing too new here, meaning that essentially we see the continuation of certain sort of like elements that existed already, and the trend, unfortunately, is not going down. Obviously, the first thing that comes to my mind is cargo theft. It's still, a very, very problematic issue, something that, continues on the foundation of, I don't know, deception, document fraud, identity theft as well. And all this obviously, unfortunately, enables criminals to proceed with cargo theft. The other thing that is interesting is that there is also trends on the rise for invoice and payment fraud. So that's something that is also affecting a very, very large chunk of logistics companies. And that is something that also has quite a significant impact in terms of like revenue loss and overall, drainage to the system, in terms of like money that is illegally subtracted to it. Double brokering is another element, of course, and it is connected to the identity theft that we touched upon before. So it's something that is very, very often being used for stealing the cargo.
Yeah.
And what is obviously continuing to unfortunately grow in many, numerous different forms, is cyber fraud, because obviously that goes in line, side by side with the advancements of technologies. So clearly nowadays, artificial intelligence is very often being leveraged by criminals to, for example, to create deepfakes, to come up with new phishing attempts, and obviously that is something that can affect a company in different ways, very often pretty harmful ways. And then finally, there's an element of payment diversions and ransom schemes. That's also interesting as a phenomenon, because you have situations whereby, um, again, very often through identity theft, payments are being diverted or loads are being held by criminals, and they're held until a ransom, so to speak, is being paid to
Yeah.
release that load. So those are kind of problems that we see happening nowadays with regard to logistics fraud, something that again is effectively a continuation of what was happening in the past. Is probably just evolving a little bit in line with new resources, new technologies that unfortunately can be used as usual, for good or for bad.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, actually, this is like pretty the same situation that I hear from our partners, our clients. So this is like the direction where still all the same types of fraud are still there. And yeah, as you mentioned, some of the new, let's say, schemas appear due to the artificial intelligence and all these tools. So that is why we started to hear about this even more. So that is why, yeah, this is something that the companies need to take into account and let's say be aware of the new ways how the criminals can exploit the information, the data that is available on the internet. So that is why, yeah, this is something that companies, I believe, not ready right now for this. So, and moving forward into the companies who are working in the logistics space, in the transportation. So, for example, if we are speaking about like the big enterprises, so they have some compliance team, insurers, they have even some dedicated fraud units that are tracking and helping them to understand where is the fraud, where is the actual, let's say, carrier or company who like their partner. But not all of the companies in the industry have such kind of support. And in your view, how are these types of fraud impacting like small and middle-sized logistics businesses?
Yeah, no, I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, and here at the World Practice, obviously, we work a lot with small, medium-sized businesses. So we have seen a lot of this, exactly what you mentioned before. You know, in large corporations, you have significant resources, even dedicated compliance teams, pretty solid IT infrastructures, so firewalls, a number of different protections. In the case of small, medium-sized enterprises, this is not always possible, and the problem becomes a little bit multi-layered, I would say, because on the one side, there is this problem about not having the capabilities or the resources to invest into building those capabilities in place, or the systems. That's one problem. The other problem is that when a small, medium-sized business gets affected by these kind of issues, it can be significantly dangerous to even the very survival of the company. Because yes, of course, there are sometimes insurances, but you don't necessarily get all the money back.
Yeah.
Sometimes some claims are being rejected by insurers because of poor documentation, which again has to do with the lack of resources that might
Yeah.
exist in this kind of environments. So, on the one side, you have financial losses, and the other layer I would say that you could add to this is that, again, it all starts from the availability of resources. Sometimes when there is a this kind of fraud happening and hitting a small, medium-sized business, because they lack redundant capacity, what happens is that a single fraudulent event can actually send the operation on a standstill. They can halt operations. So on top of the problem and the loss incurred with the event itself, you also have a bit of a downfall in terms of like operational disruption that might come out of it. And then following through, the time required to fully recover from that tends to extend, because again there are dedicated teams to look into that. So it's kind of like a bit of a domino effect, extremely problematic. Think about, I want to give you an example. There was a Texas freight brokerage company,
Mhm.
and small company, fewer than 20 employees. They lost 180 grants, $180,000 on a logistics fraud. And as a result, they actually, this happened in 2023. As a result, they had to basically lay off around 30% of their employees to remain solvent. So when I say this problem becomes almost a matter of life and death for small and medium-sized enterprises, it's something not to, I mean, I'm not being too emphatic.
Yeah,
I'm,
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
really, I'm really being truthful here with regard to the fact that on average, of course, I mean, we need to take averages with the benefit of the doubt, because they're outliers. On average, a logistics fraud accounts for around $250,000, which for many companies, small, medium-sized companies, it's a lot of money and can really put their very survival in jeopardy. So very significant issue there.
Yeah, yeah, that's for sure. So actually, I can say that the fraud for this kind of companies is like really strong hit for them, not only financially, it's also operationally. So that is why they are losing the time, they are losing the money, the cash flow stress. So the team also in stress, I believe, because they need to decide how to go out with this in situation. And as you mentioned, sometimes it leads to the layoffs. So that is why it's like really a big issue for this kind of companies. That is why they even try to build some kind of manual controls or some other processes just to feel safe, but not of them like are really working. So that is why this is something that we need to know, and this is something that these companies need to think of some other ways how to keep them safe, and how to build some kind of procedures within their company that will help to avoid this kind of situations in the future. And let's say, moving forward to the other question that I wanted to discuss with you. So we are thinking about like the road freight, like really moves fast. It involves like many handoffs and often depends on the trust and timing, and which unfortunately also makes it like a perfect target. From the recent data that I hear, that 90% of the respondents in the logistics space see the road freight as the most like vulnerable to fraud. And what steps can companies take to protect themselves better?
Yeah, if I think it boils down to the usual elements that need to be kind of like strengthened and validated in a way. I mean, let's start with technology. I mean, obviously, like safer approaches, safer systems in place. Think about not even too complicated things like multi-factor authentication is actually a very, very effective, although not 100% bulletproof, but a very effective way of fighting sort of like identity thefts, for
Mhm.
example. Okay, that's one thing. Um, we talked about this in the last interview. You know, we talked about carrier vetting tools. So, technological tools, system-based tools to vet carriers in advance.
Yeah.
But that's also, again, something that is not too complex to implement and yet quite effective. But then there's an element of process. As usual, we got systems, process, people. So as far as the process is concerned, you need to have rigor. I mean, those companies need to have rigor. Okay, so there need to be pretty strong and validated procedures, for example, for the verification of pickups, um, payment verifications. So it's like adding a proper element of due diligence in the process, in the procedures. And then, of course, there are people. You need to train people. You need to enable them to, by example, recognize phishing attempts and not fall into phishing attempts. I mean, we talked about this in a video that will be out on our channel in the next few weeks. But effectively, there is this problem of why operations are often targeted by cyber attacks, by phishing attacks and attempts, because in operations the pace is very fast, and that gives the rise to some spaces. Okay, so if the procedures are not locked in, if the systems have some kind of like holes and loopholes, well, that's exactly where criminals will try to enter. And
Yeah.
operational people tend to be targeted by phishing attempts because, again, the pace is fast. There are many, many stakeholders to deal with. So sometimes you might a bit, miss that bit that forces you to think twice before clicking on a link. Also because, again, with artificial intelligence, these deep fakes, very, like make believe type of emails are being received. You might click, enter some data that are gone. And the reality is that even when you think about that, you need to have kind of like trainings that are targeted. So training people on phishing, it's something that is important, but you cannot do that in a generic manner. So if you want to train operational people to beware of phishing attempts, you need to have a operations specific anti-phishing training. Okay,
Yeah.
not just any training. So even trainers need to be people who understand phishing, who understand technology, but who also understand operations and how
Yes. Yes.
things work in them. Okay, and then just to complete really like the picture here, I think it is important to take into account the fact that there are some industry-wide initiatives, and those are extremely helpful because collaboration and intelligence sharing, even with your competitors, is something that might help save everyone from significant issues. I don't think anybody wants anyone in their industry, even if they're fierce competitors, to go out of business because of a phishing attempt or because of a logistics fraud in general. So that's something that also, contributing in those industry-wide initiatives is something that obviously adds intelligence to everyone involved, to all parties involved, sharing experiences, and it's something that is definitely very, very helpful.
Yeah, Mirko, I totally understand, and I really like your focus that you highlighted, because mostly like the companies who are speaking about how to protect from the fraud, they were speaking about the systems, they're speaking about the tools, the verifications, the tighter onboarding of the carriers, strong pickup controls, and all the stuff. But nobody is speaking about the people who are involved in this process, and especially that you mentioned the people in the operations who can get phished, and that is why this is something that not all the companies are focused in this direction as well, and that is why there are usually some holes, like loopholes, that criminals are trying to use, and that is why highlighting this aspect is like really important for the companies to know about this direction as well, and try to make some training for their employees in order to avoid this kind of phishing attacks in their company. So that is why thank you for highlighting this part as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and moving forward, we all know, unfortunately, that fraud doesn't stand still. As companies digitize, criminals adapt just as quickly or sometimes even faster. And like looking ahead, how do you expect logistic-related fraud to evolve over the next 3, 5 years?
Yeah, really, I expect it to evolve in line with the evolution of technology. So it's pretty obvious that the first thing that comes to my mind is leverage of artificial intelligence, exploitation of artificial intelligence, and AI-driven attacks. Exactly because systems are becoming so capable that creating deep fakes, very realistic deep fakes, is something that has become incredibly easy and incredibly easy to believe as well for those who receive those kind of attacks. So that's something that can be really, really problematic. Yeah, and there are many, many stories that come to my mind. So, I mean, it's just something that there are some cases in history. I'm not gonna delve into those, but there are some cases where some deep fakes have led to incredible loss, like hundreds of millions of loss. Naturally, I mean, that's something that will continue to evolve, will continue to be more credible, and that's something to be on the watch out for. And we touched upon potential strategies a moment ago. The other thing is obviously the availability of new softwares and new vendors, and also many open source um, supply chain softwares that exist out there. And don't get me wrong, I mean, I love open source technology. I mean, just, I think ethically is something that obviously talks and speaks volumes to me. However, when we talk about, and that's something that can be very attractive also for small, medium-sized companies. Why? Because for the reason we mentioned before, there are
Yeah,
limited resources, right? But in reality, working with a reliable partner who have very safe protocols, it's so important because those open source softwares are open source for criminals as well. So
yeah,
they can study the code and they can actually, you know, penetrate the code, and that's pretty bad when that happens because once they find a way through your systems as a company, they can basically reach pretty much anywhere. Um, in line with that, I think it's interesting to see that there is an element of people engineering or human engineering or something like that, whereby very often, I mean, we go back to people being unfortunately, sometimes the weakest link in the chain of protection there. It's surprising sometimes, because there are like identities thefts and so on. People pretend to be someone else, and sometimes they manage to get credentials directly from people who
yeah,
should protect those credentials. That's human engineering. That's really like deception in its finest state, I would say. But that's something that will also continue because you can progressively, as a criminal, you can access one layer after another after another after another. So you basically like progressively continue getting closer and deeper into the system. And then, we need to think about the fact that, by example, with IoT devices, this is obviously becoming more and more common. So goods tend to be, more connected than ever.
Hmm.
And it's a good thing because you have real-time visibility.
Yes,
True.
yes.
The problem is that these devices are connected to the web. Okay, they send real-time signals. So devices themselves sometimes can be carriers of problems of penetration into the system. The devices are connected to the systems, so criminals, by accessing those devices, could potentially access those systems, that parent systems, right? So that's something also to be taken into account. Again, the importance of working with very, very reliable partners. And then of course, ransomware, it's something that will also continue because let's face it, with the evolution of AI, coding is becoming more accessible, more affordable, easier for everyone. Therefore, the threats, cyber threats, become unfortunately more sophisticated.
Yeah.
And ransomware is a good declination of it, a good example, because obviously when there is a ransomware accessing your system, it becomes very complicated to unlock it.
Yeah, yeah. Unfortunately, that's true. And I can say so. This is like all the points that you highlighted. This is like I believe, the very future that is waiting for us, unfortunately. But I can say that from what you mentioned, I totally believe, yeah, that the fraud will become like more automated, more personalized due to the deep fakes and all this stuff. And that is why it would be like really hard to spot this kind of with the manual checks. And that is why I believe like the point is that in the future we also need to focus exactly on the solutions for the preventions of this fraud and the continuous detection of this, understanding how to solve this kind of problems that appear when, for example, the code is penetrated, yeah, how to protect your system from this. And that is why, as technology is changing, you need to find the new ways. And that is why I really like your idea regarding like the collaboration together on the creation of this kind of preventing tools. That is why this is something that I believe we need to work with in the future to beat the fraud, yeah, and
Yes.
trying to beat the fraud, yeah, because I believe this is like ever evolving challenge that will be waiting us in the future. And moving forward to the next and the last question that I have for you today, Mirka, is like most of the companies like really don't want to turn into banks. They want to move freight, yeah. But the reality is that the fraud prevention is now the part of the service quality that they need to provide. Yeah, like the transportation companies as well. And that is why we already talked about this topic a little bit earlier today, but maybe we can like focus on some kind of strategic advice that you could offer to the logistic companies that are looking to strengthen their fraud prevention efforts.
Yeah, let me say I really like the connotation of beating the fraud that you used before. I mean, the reality is that uh, there are two ways of beating the fraud, right? There is like any corrective actions, preventive actions. So you want to, on the one side, act on preventing the fraud from happening, and on the other side, unfortunately, you can't possibly necessarily control always everything. Things sometimes go wrong, so you need to have also a corrective way of addressing the issue. Okay. From a prevention perspective, as you mentioned, we talked about this moments ago. Again, people, process, technology. Okay, so those three things, getting them very well in order. I want to insist on the concept. And again, it's difficult for me to say that. Why? Because even, myself, what I do at the Wolf practice here, for us, people are like the central element. Even with our clients, we put people before technology. Industry 5.0 is putting machines to serve people.
Mm.
So I'm really like a huge people believer. I don't believe in a world where machines will replace people. That said, people still remain the weakest link. So let's clarify this concept. People are the weakest link in the chain. So it is absolutely paramount to invest in people training. Okay, people training, people capability, getting also the right people on board.
Yes.
And then in connection to the process, we talked about strengthening the procedures. In connection with technology, we touched upon really working with the right partner who have the right sort of like security frameworks in place. I mean, you at Tech, of course, you're specialized also in on logistics fraud and prevention thereof. If there is a point where logistics fraud happen anyhow, because again, not everything can be controlled, there are some other companies that can really help targets to basically recover a little bit of their load. For example, work with a company called Overall that is also specialized in this. So like finding the right partners, technology partners who can help you with that clearly is so very important.
Yes.
And making sure that those partners utilize validated protocols. Um, I think it's important to remember security is really not an option for two reasons. Because as we mentioned, you can put company in jeopardy, serious survival risk. And second thing is more and more a company that supplies their services to another company is probably being asked by the latter to demonstrate their security capabilities,
Yes.
because you know you as usual, any chain, any supply chain, any custody chain, security chain is just as strong as its weakest link. That also includes the suppliers ecosystem. And that is why you can have the best protocols in the world, but if you don't lock the same, you don't lock the door through your suppliers, the moment those suppliers are connected to your system and they actually undergo some sort of attacks, your systems are at risk, no matter how good your protections are. So that's also something to be taken into account. And last but not least, we're going back to the point of process. I mean, of course, I said this 3 times already. You cannot control everything. So you also need to have significant and very strong business continuity plans in place. So preparing for incident response and business continuity if something goes wrong. What happens next? The last thing you want to have is a situation where you're already in deep troubles because of the logistics fraud, and on top of that, as we mentioned, 10 minutes ago, your operations go on a standstill because you don't know what to do. Your systems are stuck because
Yeah.
obviously you need to basically close the door. You need to sort of like silo the problem. Fair enough, but then of course, you need to have like manual procedures or backup systems or whatever solution you want to find in your business continuity plan to make sure that you can continue performing your services or delivering your goods or whatever you're doing, right? So that's for me like elements that are all equally important, all needed to be taken into account truly.
Yeah. Thank you, Mirka. So this is like really great points that you highlighted, and I really like your approach regarding like moving and highlighting where, for example, the weakest points here are in the process. So this is like the operations, this is the people, and that is why I believe like all the companies who are working in this space, who are wanting to prevent the fraud in their companies. So I believe, yeah, there should be like layered defenses and like training the teams. This is something that is really important right now, and you highlighted this several times, and I'll totally agree with you, because training teams on the red flags, keep irritating on iterating, yeah, on different types of the defense, building out the security, checking the partners, the development providers who are working with the tools that you're working with. This is something also that you need take into account while building out your defenses, because some of the companies, they just focusing on what is going on within their company, but they are not actually checking and discussing what's the could be the security layers so between the partners and the system they're integrating into and working together. So that is why this is something that the companies also need to stick to, and that is why highlighting all these points, this is like really strategic directions where the companies need to look into. Yes, so thank you very much, Mirko,
You're welcome.
for for this year and for highlighting all these important points to our listeners. So that is why I believe this is like the key questions that I wanted to discuss today with you, Mirko. And thank you so much for joining us and sharing the perspective for the future of the fraud and the activities that the companies can do to prevent it. I believe like the fraud can feel like a little bit like overwhelming because it is where the logistic is like the most sensitive. This is like the trust, speed, and margin. But today's conversations make it clear that companies can protect themselves, and with the right habits, with the right controls, with the right training, with the right tools, so they can do it effectively. So that is why thank you very much.
You're
And
welcome.
to our listeners, yeah, if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who is in your network who deals with the carrier onboarding, operations, finance, or claims. So, yeah, reach out, and thanks for listening. And we'll see you in the next episode.
Thank you.